Our next speaker is a gentleman whom I've come to know as having the patience of Job. He has the interpersonal skill of a diplomat and the leader of a true altruist. That's Mr. Phil Zulueta. Phil is currently an independent consultant, previously a program element manager with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, where he's responsible for a team that performed many of the methods of component evaluation and protection. He's held similar responsibilities at well-known leaders in our industry, such as Electro Science Laboratories, Ball Aerospace, Hughes Microelectronics, and Northrop Grumman. Phil holds a master's degree from Pepperdine and an undergraduate degree from Cal State in Long Beach. Please join me in welcoming the head of the G19 SAE committee, Mr. Phil Zulueta.
My talk today is stated up here, but basically, as Henry had indicated, the first standard that the G19 committee developed and released was AS5553. And within a few months of its release, I started to get emails and telephone calls that, this standard is good. It looks like it appeared to have broad global acceptance, but it was still lacking on certain things. For example, people wanted to see more international content. Well, when we developed 5553, it was clearly US-centric. We had no idea that, even though we knew that the problem was global. And so one of the things we did was to launch into a revision A of 5553, primarily to pull in more international content, which meant that we needed to have more international members of the G19 committee. And so one of the first things I did was to get one of our members in the UK to lead up the development of AS5553A. The other thing that we started to hear about was distributors. Even though 5553, we had actually developed it for OEMs and their use, the distributors wanted to have something themselves. Now, I'm not talking about the franchise authorized distributors. I understand there may even be something getting started in that regard. But I'm talking mostly about the independent distributors or the non-franchised or those types of distributors that deal with parts from the open market. And as the Department of Commerce report indicated, the entry of counterfeit parts into the supply chain primarily fall or come from the non-franchise or independent distribution part of the supply chain. And so this became a very challenging a task for us, but that's what we did. We took AS5553 and we started to develop this document called AS6081. It's been 3 years now, and we've been talking about it at conferences. I leak a little information on what it is that we're going to put into it. I get feedback, and I'll give you a little update on where we are with respect to AS6081. But AS6081 is related to 5553, and so part of what I'm going to show here is the synergy between the two documents and how they work together. So first of all, I'll start with an overview of the G19 documents. I'll talk about the synergy between the two documents, AS5553A and 6081, and then I'll summarize. We have several committees that have been started within the last 5 years, and all of them are part of the G19. Each one has a specific document or group of documents that they're responsible for. I'm happy to say that many of the chairmen that head up these subcommittees are actually present here, so I'm happy about that. The first one I want to mention here is this G19CI. This they named themselves continuous improvement because they feel that once they're finished with 5553A, they may move on to another document. Well, we'll see. It's taken them a while to actually get to close to the release of the revision A. Distributor Subcommittee is AS 6081. I happen to be chairing that one myself. Distributor Risk Characterization Subcommittee, ARP 6178. This was what we thought was going to be a relatively quick task. Actually, it was relatively quick compared to the others, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get to it. 6171, this is a huge task. Sultan Alani, who is here, is going to give you an update on that one. But basically, there was a need that we felt to develop a standard for test lab. In other words, if you had to determine the authenticity of your parts before you actually receive them, where would you go and what would you ask those facilities to do? Well, it turned out that the test labs that are out there today do not all operate the same way. And what we tried to do here in this document is to try to standardize the processes and hopefully be consistent throughout the industry on what you're going to have done to the parts. The G19C committee, standards compliance. Many of the documents that we're generating are intended for independent third-party auditing or certification. And so we wanted to make sure that as we generate these documents that they comply with certain audit requirements. And so many of the members of this committee are from the audit community. And Bill Schofield, who's sitting in the back, actually leads this effort. It is not an easy committee to manage, as he well knows. And so my hat's off to him. It does have some issues. There's a lot of disagreements within the audit community and how things should be done and so forth. But anyways, I'm glad he accepted that responsibility. It's not an easy one. Terms and definitions subcommittee. When we developed 5553, one of the first things we had to tackle was defining certain terms. And again, this was an area that one of the things we wanted to do in our document was to educate not only ourselves, but also those who were going to use the documents. When we came across terms or definitions that we were not sure of, we actually had to go out and seek expertise and so forth. But eventually, we've decided to actually generate a separate document because each of these documents turned out to have their own terms and definitions. And because of the time phasing of the release of these documents, it wasn't easy to keep up with all the changes that were taking place on a continuous basis. So we decided to generate a terms and definitions document, which all our other documents will eventually point to. So when you take a look at this this applications slide I have here, let's see. Yeah, I have it here somewhere. So think of these as swim lanes. They're supposed to be a real faint line, but you can't see it here in this slide. Distributor, user, test provider. And when you see a document that crosses all three of these areas, that, for example, it applies to all three. This gives you an idea of the application of these documents. Again, terms and definitions, AIR 6273. We have, as we make changes to these definitions, they're being compiled, and this is already in a draft phase right now. That document will hopefully be going to balloting within the next few months. ARP 6178 is this tool for distributor risk assessment. This was actually first The concept of this was first developed by a gentleman on our committee who's involved with the Missile Defense Agency. And he was tasked with going out to visit a wide variety of suppliers, independent distributors, test houses, a wide range anyways. And he started to collect a lot of information. He put a spreadsheet together which he thought was a tool to rank the suppliers as he would go and make these visits. And he shared that with the committee, and we were thinking, this is a great tool that people could use. Would you find out if your management would be willing to share this information? We put it together in a document and release it to the public. He did receive that permission, and so he was actually tasked with leading the effort along with Dan DeMacy at that time to develop this document. It turns out it's actually two parts. It's a spreadsheet in an Excel form, and it was also a Word file. When you actually go to purchase it, however, from SAE, it turns out to be a PDF document. Now, I was a little concerned about that because one of the values of this tool is the spreadsheet function and the ranking features that are in it. Well, they assure me that if the individuals ask for it, they'll get the Excel file. I don't know how they do that, but anyways, make sure that if you purchase this document that you also get the Excel file, because then it has all the formulas and so forth on the ranking. But we found out that this tool can be used, for example, if you wanted to find a supplier or rank suppliers. It could be a desktop tool. You could actually use this tool to make phone calls, ask questions before you even decide to go out and conduct a site visit. When you make the site visit, you can use this tool. Or if you're an OEM and you want to conduct your own survey or audit of that supplier, this tool could be used. It is not intended, however, to replace what an independent third-party auditor would do. So just keep that in mind. 6171, you're going to hear about this from Sultan in a few minutes. But this particular document will cover a wide range of tests that could be used in the authentication process. The level of testing will be risk-based. It will include sampling plans. Much of what that committee put together in the beginning, we actually incorporated into AS 6081, and I'll tell you the reasons for that a little bit later. But the other important thing about this document is that accreditation of the test laboratory will be required. And my understanding is that they're going to look for ISO 17025 accreditation. And so these test labs will actually be the certifying bodies. So that's an important point. And once released and implemented, we will actually initiate discussions on revising 5553 and 6081 and reference AS 6171. 5553A, again, this is primarily designed to update content, add global references. Majority of the members are currently out of the OEM aerospace defense high-rel community. We're actually seeking more members. Most of our members now are in the US, in the UK, and a few other countries, but we really need or would like to have more international members. If you are part of an organization which has international employees and so forth, and they're interested in participating, please let us know. 6081, again, this is similar to 5553. We started with 5553, and we started to tailor it for distributors of parts or for those who deal with parts from the open market. And that's an important distinction. It's not necessarily limited to non-franchised or independent distributors. The reason I say that, we tried to target it for parts or suppliers who deal with parts in the open market, because one of the things we found out as we started to find definitions of different elements of the supply chain, we found out that a good part of what you think are franchise distributors also operate like independent distributors. Many of your franchise distributors also will buy and sell parts from the open market. And so, so we didn't want to limit it to non-franchise distributors, or for those who just call themselves non-franchise distributors. So this would also be applicable to those franchise distributors that buy and sell in the open market. OEMs can use 6081 to meet some of the flow-down requirements of 5553. They can certainly ask or specify that their suppliers be certified to AS 6081. Again, independent third-party CBs, certification bodies, will be involved in the verification and certification of their compliance to 6081. Now, one of the things that this last bullet here I wanted to point out is that we started to hear the term AS 6081 qualified parts. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that this document is not intended to certify or qualify the parts. This document is intended to certify the distributor of those open market parts. One of the important things that we started to get a little confused with, because again we started with 5553 and we started to adapt it for use of distributors, but we had to adopt this little graphic thing here just to make sure that people know that when you see the term organization in the document, we're talking about the distributor who has a relationship with the customer and the supplier. So we started to use the term organization in the document, and hopefully we're consistent in that. That was particularly important when we were talking about contract clauses, and it started to get a little confusing, and so that helped us keep things straight. All right, I know you can't read this scope statement here of the two documents, but basically they are somewhat similar. This is the scope statement on 5553A. There's a little more specificity in 6081, and so just keep that in mind. I understand you'll get copies of all these slides sometime after the symposium. Both of these documents, 5553A and AS 6081, it's important to distinguish that these documents are not intended to replace existing quality management systems documents like AS 9100 or AS 9120 or ISO 9001. They're actually intended to supplement them. And so in 6081, we even specify that the organization or distributor shall be certified to a QMS, and we give an example such as ISO 9001 or AS 9120 or equivalent. By a certification body accredited, which has a linking to the IAF. We spent, again, a lot of time with definitions, and the definition that we had in 5553A we actually revised, because one of the main reasons that it was brought to our attention primarily by our international members that our definition in 5553 is probably a little incorrect, because what you have there is also a definition for fraud. And we didn't consider a definition for fraud, but based on that input, we ended up crafting a definition for fraud. This might even change. I understand Keith Gregory, who you will hear a little bit later today, is involved with a special task group who's identifying areas in the revision of 6081, revision A, where we may actually change this definition of fraudulent part, but I'll wait to hear from him a little bit later. But so we started to separate or make a distinction between a suspect part, a fraudulent part, and counterfeit part. And so this is the definition we've come up with. It may not necessarily quite agree with the NDAA definition that they have for counterfeit. I actually have a little disagreement with that because I think what they have is also includes fraud. But anyways, we tried to make a distinction between fraud and counterfeit. And basically the main distinction is that a counterfeit part has been confirmed to be a copy. In other words, there was actually altered or modified, okay? And if, for example, if you just take a pulled part, a used part, and you clean it up and you try to sell it as new without necessarily altering it, we say that's a fraudulent part, or that's fraud. It's not necessarily counterfeit until you actually alter it. Alter it means you could blacktop it, you could remove the marking, put new markings down. That's what we call a counterfeit part. One of our members actually put this little bullseye target thing together to help us distinguish, sort of give you a graphic depiction of the differences. So basically, you start with a suspect part. Fraudulent parts and counterfeit parts could be start out as a suspect part, but with some testing, you might determine that they're fraudulent or counterfeit. What this says, sort of a Venn diagram here, all counterfeit parts are fraudulent, but not all fraudulent parts are counterfeit. When you take a look at the differences of comparison, when you compare the two documents together, they are similar. In 5553A, you will see some new sections. We did actually add a section on training, personnel training, failure analysis, and something they've called post-delivery support. This just recently changed within the last a couple months. And of course, 6081, everything here again, came from 5553, but we expanded it. The last time I gave a presentation similar to this, I mentioned this new requirement. And I can tell you that it is not very popular among the non-franchised or independent distributors. But what we have decided to do in order for an OEM to conduct a proper parts mislitigation program, we want to make sure that the supplier at the point of quotation actually discloses who they're going to be buying the parts from, where they're located, whether the organization is or is not authorized or franchised for the parts being quoted, and whether there is a full manufacturer's warranty associated with the quoted material. Now, many independent distributors consider that kind of information proprietary. They don't want you to know where you bought those parts until actually you have already received them. But by then, it's probably too late for you to conduct a proper risk mitigation. And so we actually want full disclosure at the time of quotation. Now, we understand that because many independent distributors have difficulty in signing up to this, we actually added the latter half of this. If the organization considers the name of the source of supply is proprietary, then we suggest that, or you shall, negotiate an appropriate non-disclosure agreement. Now, I understand non-disclosure agreements are common, among independent distributors, and so they said this is our normal part of business, so we can live with this in this case. I can still tell you that many independents will not buy up to this. They don't even want to be associated with it because of this. At the ERAI conference earlier this year, I had the pleasure of meeting an independent distributor out of the UK who I was really thrilled with his presentation because he, as an independent distributor, actually has quite a bit of business from the Ministry of Defense. And he says part of it is because he believes in this particular statement. He has full disclosure. He tells his supplier, or I mean his customer, everything, who's he gonna buy it from, and so forth. And so this is not really an impossible requirement. The fact that he stated that tells us, and actually told a lot of the U.S. independent distributors, that this is possible. To have full disclosure, to have that kind of relationship with your customer, and to have the loyalty from your customer in kind, I think is a good thing. And so you're going to see this requirement. It's in 6081. We have not pulled it out. Verification of purchased product. The difference between these two documents, in one 5553A just says, you know, you shall have a documented process, or you shall ensure the detection of suspect or confirm fraudulent counterfeit parts. In 6081, we actually decided to, because of the phasing, we knew that 6081 was going to come out before 6171, the test document. We decided that we needed to pull some test or minimum set of test requirements into 6081. However, at the same time, we also allowed the customer can actually specify or go beyond that minimum set. He can actually specify a full suite of tests if he wants. So that's certainly allowed within 6081. And so he asked if we could actually put together sort of a flow diagram which shows how 6081 would be implemented. And so what I've shown here, again, the same kind of tracks here: supplier, organization, customer, and these are different steps in the process of 6081 that you implement. And then down here, this is actually the section on the specific testing, minimum test requirements. When you're completed, then you go back, and then you just finish up. We have a section on the control of suspect, fraudulent, or confirmed counterfeit parts. Again, we go into a little bit more detail. We actually have a very detailed section in the appendices in B16 here, which Keith and his team actually put together, and maybe he'll talk a little bit about that today. All right, so where are we on the release status? 5553 actually is in its 14-day affirmation ballot. It's actually going to be finished November 6th. The way an affirmation ballot works, according to the SAE process, is that it goes out to the committee, and you only respond if you object to its release. Otherwise, if you don't respond, it gets passed. Assuming it takes, it goes through that 14-day affirmation ballot successfully, the process is to go through to the SAE Aerospace Council, and they go through their balloting process. That could be a full 28-day, and so that's why we're estimating end of December timeframe it should be released. 6081. I just got word that it actually passed the SAE Aerospace Council ballot yesterday. There was 2 comments that came in. They asked us to change a little bit of the scope statement. There were 2 parts of it. I already responded yesterday to that. The first part I objected to. I didn't want to change. They basically were asking us to limit the application of 6081 to non-franchise distribution. I didn't want to do that for the reason I mentioned earlier, because it turns out that many franchise distributors also work like non-franchise distributors. And so I gave them the explanation why I wouldn't want to change that. The second part I did agree to, and that was they had asked that it wasn't actually clear. They thought that this could apply to OEMs or aerospace integrators. Actually, the first part of the scope statement indicates that it's for distributors of open market parts, but I think they may have missed that. So I made sure that, in the revision of that scope statement that I put it in bold. And then I did specifically add that it does not apply to OEMs or aerospace integrators. So I did agree to that. So I'm waiting to hear from them, hopefully today, maybe tomorrow. I don't know what the process is, if this has to go back to the Aerospace Council or not, but the intent is to try to get this released as quickly as possible. I do have a little bit of information. Henry alluded to something called this trusted supplier. I don't know if this, what I'm going to tell you, is a trusted supplier program from the DoD or not. But if you were to go to the DLA Land and Maritime website, you will, and look for something called QTSL, which I understand stands for Qualified Test Suppliers List or something like that. They're planning to roll out this QTSL program mid-November. And they're waiting for the release of 6081. I don't know how they're going to use 6081 in this QTSL program. Very honestly, I just don't know. I haven't seen any documentation or to know one way or the other. But so they will either invoke 6081 or they'll pull specific parts out of 6081 to use in this QTSL program. Now, whether this QTSL program is a trusted supplier program or not, again, I don't know. So many of us, we're still waiting for the DFARS and a little bit more definition from DoD on what all this means. But there's a limited paragraph in the DLA Land and Maritime website regarding this QTSL program. Okay. So I want you to know that when I initially started this work 5 years ago, I never thought I'd still be here 5 years later, involved with this. But it's just continuing. The counterfeiters, they react, they get better at the counterfeiting, and so we have to react. In fact, during 6081's development, there were two things that came up that we decided we had to address and add into the test requirements. We had to add some certain tests to make sure that we covered those two new things that the counterfeiters are doing. And we'll continue to do that. I mean, if the counterfeiters, if we discover something else that the counterfeiters is doing, we'll react and we'll revise our documents accordingly. I want to just point out the last bullet because I like to say this each time. There's no one practice, combination of practices, standard, or certification to that standard's requirements that will prevent fraudulent counterfeit parts from entering the supply chain. There's no, these are risk-based procedures, so there's always a risk. That means there could be counterfeits coming in, okay? But we feel that the G19 series of documents provide a vehicle for specific elements of the supply chain to work together and minimize that risk. In other words, the only way we can really combat this problem is if we're open to each other, we collaborate with each other, full disclosure, and that kind of thing. And so we feel that our documents facilitate that process. Thank you.